Book The Belgians by Lano and Inbel. I don't know who written it. I don't see it. The Belgians. Koen Matthijs, Michel Draguet. Photography by Christine Bastin, Herman Berthiaud, Liv Brancard, Elisabeth Broekart, Jacques Evrard, Leopold Oosterlink, Philippe Van Utrieve, Joost Winkeer. So it's a book from 1992. The publisher would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation, the Belgian Office for Office Trade in Bell, the Belgian Fuji Agency N.V. American Color Lab, and the many institute companies that individual who have contributed in many ways to the conception and of this book. It's a book from 1992. Chapter 1. History and Tradition. Michel Droiset. Page 11. Chapter 2. A Profile of the People. Koen Matthijs. Page 29. Chapter 3. Leisure and Pleasure. Koen Matthijs. Page 73. Living in Democracy. Koen Matthijs. Chapter 4. Page 111. Chapter 5, Work and Prosperity, Koen Matthijs, page 145. Chapter 6, Diversity and Cultural Innovation, Michel Draguet, page 189. Contents. Our country has the unique advantage of lying at the crossroad of the great culture of Europe. Let this be a stimulus of us to build up a deeper understanding of our fellow men by getting to know and appreciate their language, their religion, and their culture. For love can only grow through understanding. King Baudouin. The Kingdom of Belgium, 30,518 square kilometers, enjoys a unique geographical location in the center of the Golden Triangle of Western Europe. 10 million of people who live and work in a land bounded on the one side by the grey sandy beaches and dunes of North Sea. The coastline stretches for 67 kilometers, and on the other by the richly forested hillside of the Ardennes. This represents a population density of 326 inhabitants per square kilometer, a very high demographic concentration. Only the Netherlands is more densely populated, which live in mark on the landscape. In the northern part of the country lives almost 5.8 Dutch-speaking Flemish, south of the capital, Brussels, which is a bilingual island of 1 million inhabitants in the middle of the territory of the Flemish community. Lies Wallonia, with its 3.2 million French-speaking inhabitants. In the east, there are 60,000 German-speaking Belgians. Between Flanders and Wallonia runs the 1500 years old linguistics and cultural borders which has remained almost unchanged over the years, as the interface between the Germanic and the Latin words. The Belgians are a microcosm of the people of Europe. Belgians are deeply aware of their past history. Every day of their life they see it around them and carry it with them. It is more than a mere visual awareness of the charming countryside of their land with its historical cities, cathedrals, belfry and narrow medieval streets. Nothing on what Belgium is today, a little corner of Europe which is one of the 10 most prosperous countries on the world, where an incredible variety of Europe, of people and ideas pass throughout. None of this can be explained with without understanding of the past, the roots of the people, and the painful development of the three languages, culture, and social and political temperature which grew up on Belgian soil. Belgium is not particularly rich in natural resources. It is the Belgian people themselves with their dynamism and will to work, their language skills and inventiveness, who together with Luxembourg, they partner in the Belgian-Luxembourg Economic Union, BLEU, Bleu, have made their country the ninth greatest trading nation with the highest export per capita in the world. This statistic will give a concrete picture of how these three peoples which make up our nation live and work and earn our country the reputation of a place where the living is good. There is a map of the Belgium country. You can see it by the big roads, the important roads, airports. You can see Great Britain, France, Germany. Important the normal region is in orange and the important region is violet where a lot of people lives. Maybe we'll put a picture if I think of it. Chapter 1. History and Traditions. Seeing a country's past through the eyes of its inhabitants transforms our reading of its history. The linear progress of time gives way to a subjective interpretation which actively mixes memory and unconscious, in which everyone draws from the past the element he needs in order to express his own identity. In order to understand the essence of a country, we must interrogate what it was in the past in order to discover the particular features which conditions its future. Belgium, at the end of our 20th century, is committed to a path of federalism which guarantees the respect of every person within the diversity of culture on which the country is founded. At the time as the difficult assimilation of Central and Eastern European countries into the orbit of Europe, of the 12 is posed in terms of resurgent nationalism, Belgium became in this way a model of cooperation between communities with different cultures. Today, Belgium, lacking a national future, have assimilated their destiny to that of Europe. This expansion of horizons corresponds closely to the lesson of our past, which made the area between Meuse and the Scheldt into a crossroad open to the whole world. Going back in time, we can ask what makes up Belgium's particular identity. It is not just Belgitude, the sense of the Belgian specificity. At the turn of the century, the sense of belonging to a nation was based more on a sentiment than on reason. For many, the fact of being Belgian revives the memory of past sacrifices. In a country born in the 19th century, the two wars which shook the world apart in 1914 to 1918 and 1940 and 1945 who waddled together in adversity those who were opposed to barbarism and the rule of darkness. National unity was born in war and became incarnated in a spirit of resistance to which Belgians have always remained attached. The image of Albert I, the Night King, remains alive in the collective memory, symbolizing the resistance and determination of a people and a state. But Belgium is a country of paradox. Just when national unity was becoming more important than class interest, Belgium began a long community identity crisis, which 20 centuries of occupation have never succeeded by crystallizing. After 1918, Whilst giving to the world the image of a strongly unified country, Flanders and Wallonia were giving different interpretations to a common past and moving toward an antagonism which was to replace what till then has been only collaboration and understanding. The time of division and secession had come. The north of the country, essentially rural, was attached to the memory of its soil, whilst the south, faced with uncontrolled industrialization, saw the key issue for the country lying in the combat for democracy. History took on different colors which have remained vivid until today. What is Belgium today? The Belgium is a child of the 19th century, born of a revolution inspired by the Romantic period. The birth itself occurred during an opera performance, La Muette de Portici, at the Monet Opera House. Belgium became a political invention nourished by cultural design. This fact in itself is revealing. The example of the July Day pushed the Brussels bourgeois class to claim an independence, which already brought to the surface the difference in sensitivity between North and South. Until 1898, French remained the one official language of Belgium. The 1830s revolution was represented to the world as the reaction of a French-speaking Catholic bourgeoisie hostile to the Protestant aristocracy of the Orange-Nassau family imposed by the Allies in 1815. In cultural terms, Belgium was born of the economic desire of the French-speaking elite, which was already leading the country down the path of a massive industrialization. The Belgian identity, which took shape in 1830s, demonstrate a consensus-style pragmatism. Accepting the political and strategical compromises imposed from abroad in order to achieve its economic and cultural plans. Belgium, a new piece on the European chessboard, had to defend its frontiers. In October 1831, the Netherlands violated its integrity, annexing Maastricht, Limburg, and German-speaking Luxembourg. The split between the North Netherlands and the South Belgium, born on the barricade of 15 Augustus 1830, consecrated the independence of the new country, soon to have its own constitution promulgated on 11 February 1831, and monarchy, Saxe-Cobourg-Gotha. The constitution set out to unite Enlightenment ideas of progress and traditional political concept. As such, it confirmed the sovereignty of the nation defined by a constitutional and hereditary monarchy. The image of consensus was solidly established. The choice of sovereign demonstrated a typical spirit of reconciliation and sense of compromise raised to a diplomatic art. The person of Leopold of Saxe-Cobourg-Gotha combined the interests of every major power of its time without directly representing any one of them. From 1830 onwards, the monarchy imposed itself as the primary symbol of the nation unity. Its birth was achieved in return for the limitation. Its birth was achieved in return for the limitation of its foreign ambition. The European powers meeting in London imposed a perpetual neutrality on the nascent Belgian state. This notion is not uninteresting. It consecrates the vision of a Belgium which, like a keystone at the center of Europe, maintains the balance of a nation. The newly constituted state of Belgium is acceptable only if it looks in on itself. Its right to exist given in return to a renunciation of international ambition. Here we already have the image of a country in which will associate its identity to its own negation. The birth of the Belgian state owes as much to Britain's desire to isolate France as the capacity of the Netherlands to hold back together what had been torn apart by the Reformation. Belgium is an artificial country. A central part of its identity is that it tolerates neither strong central power nor autocratic utilitarism. The living force of Belgium resides in the strength of its city, solidly anchored in prosperous and dynamic region. Seen from a distance, its frontiers appear to be drawn from the outside rather than the inside. The history of 1830 does not belong to the same order of values that of previous centuries. From independence onwards, a conflict exists between the logique de l'État and the will of the people. For all its historical richness, pre-1830s Belgium exists for its inhabitants only in the form of clichés, symbols, images nourished by a way of life and a tradition of thought. In July 1831, the break was experienced as a country freeing itself from the murderous history of major European powers. From the Burgundians to the Dutch occupation, with Australia's Spanish and French overlords among the way, Belgium, a flamboyant anachronism, consists of a few tracts of land spread out between the North Sea and the Meuse. Having acquired its independence, Belgium was able to satisfy its ambitions, economic development and industrial expansion hand in hand with an intellectual climate dominated by the myth of progress. Thus, the 19th century was to organize the Belgian collective unconscious by imposing the image of an independent state. Albeit subject to the caprice of the warmongering neighbors and its duty to a perpetual neutrality, Belgium was allowed to exist only for itself, which explained unpretentiousness and a quality of life which remained very particular to it, and a dynamism which make it forever press forward. In 1835, it was in Belgium that the first railway line on the continent was built. Belgium was viewed as a model of liberalism, a haven of all exiled from the less open regime. Its industrialization has seen as a pillar of progress. 5 key economy centers grew up: Ghent, Antwerp, Brussels, the Liège Bassin, and the Mons Charleroi region. If Flanders was to remain attached to its first economic tradition, Wallonia in the first half of the 19th century experienced the mechanization of its heavy industry. This economic development took on a different social significance in the north and the south of the country. In Wallonia, high population density was an high population and industrial concentration were to favor the development of a sub-proletariat which was to weigh heavily on the political development of the country at the end of the century. The exploitation of the lowest social classes was to permit the concentration of economic and banking empires in Brussels. At the heart of Europe, Belgium was seen as a country of democracy. Its refusal of any authoritarian centralism distinguished it from France. The new highly constituted Belgium immediately granted substantial autonomy to its local authorities, like a reminder of its past and the grandeur of its cities. Belgium's constitution aims to arbitrate in a dialogue between the actors of public life rather than as act as the agent of a strong central power. From the start, Belgium has had a dominant bourgeoisie with, for several decades, a French-speaking culture in both Antwerp and Ghent. Intellectual circles spoke French as the distinctive sign of belonging to an elite. To this cultural domination was to be added, throughout the 19th century, the economic control of a prosperous Wallonia in a process of major industrial expansion. The coal mine of the Borinage, Charleroi, and the Liège Bassin favored the development of industrial empire as yet unknown in Flanders. In the north of the country was to perceive in the constitution of the state as a disappointment. The south was soon to associate with a capitalism planned foreign to the interest of Wallonia proletarianized population. The century was marked by political demand which, both in the north and the south, reflected different and later divergent concerns: a Flemish identity to be restored in the south, the desired triumph of a worker state. Flemish identity to be restored in the north, the desired triumph of a worker state in the south. Where to impose different political development between the two, Brussels became the target of a strong criticism. Little by little, Wallonia and Brussels were to move further and further apart in the collective unconscious, settling an impoverished Wallonia against a rich and haughty capital, where Flanders saw in Brussels part of its territory occupied by French speakers. Walloons were to equate the capital with the uncontrolled industrialization, which was oppressing them. The Flemish question, essentially cultural in nature, is mirrored by a Wallon question, based on economic crisis and a severe social deprivation. Whilst Flanders has aspired to the recognition of its tradition and specificity within a dominantly French-speaking Belgium, Wallonia demanded the true outgoing transformation of the social order. The economic crisis of its traditional industries, accelerated by the old crisis, was to produce a major upheaval in the social order. The coal mines were closing their gates. Flanders, anxious to affirm itself, was exploiting its new industrial prospect, whilst Wallonia was growing poorer. By the end of the 60s, the social and economic relationship between the two had reversed. Belgium tears itself apart internally, whilst the dramatic moments of history strengthen the sense of cohesion in the collective imagination. Nonetheless, cultural experiences, confessional divergences, and political antagonism return every time a crisis is over. The two world wars making the 20th century were to force destiny by disturbing the economic and social order. In 1918 was to impose universal suffrage. 1945 marked the end of the unitarian dream. If the Belgian quarrel, it also know how to make up. The Belgian Compromise, which has become part of the century political culture, as well as clichés imposed from abroad, are part of Belgium's identity, an identity which found its historic expression in the colonial saga born of the Congo inheritance, 1908. In the resistance of the Belgian army on the river Isère in 1914 and its defiant opposition to the Nazi invader in 1914. The symbol of its unity throughout these testing times, the royal dynasty has formed the cement of a common will expressed independently of individual or regional attachment. Belgium's identity affirms itself as an answer to history, a defensive reflex when danger threatens. It is not therefore logical that this sentiment will change in the wake of the new reality imposed by the Europe and the region promised for 1993. Interrogation point. In 1970 to 71, the Constitution recognized four linguistic regions: Flanders, Wallonia, the German-speaking cantons, and Brussels. The Statute of Brussels was to pose problems until 1989, when it elected its regional council and formed its first executive. The region and communities were officially constituted as far back as 1970s. 10 years later, they were given executive separate from the central power. The institutional development of this country have been toward a federalism which guarantees the specificity of each of the parties. Within this context, the history of each of the communities contributes to defining its deep identity and undoubtedly to developing new forms of collaboration between communities in which unity will be born of diversity. History, colored with folklore, walking as a high-quality art de vivre, remains the best visiting card of this entire Pacific. Entente Pacifique. Those today's Belgium seek to efface the memory of 1830 by substituting a double reality which is both broader and more intimate, a European ambition which could erase its frontier, leaving it with the reality of its cities and regions. Belgium's future lies in a typical destiny which finds its unity in the respect of its diversity and is found on the extension of our country horizons to the European level. We must look deeper. What role will history play for this country whose industrial physiognomy is in a state of perpetual changes? We must point out from the beginning that the state is viewed by Belgians as something opaque and nebulous. The state, the communities, the regions, their pertinence and limits are all jumbled up in the collective unconsciousness. The institutions are doubly complex in their lack of symmetry. Wallonia and Brussels live in two distinct economic regions with nonetheless a combined force in personal matters, education, health, culture, etc. Within a larger entity called the French-speaking community, in the north of the country, the Flemish community constitutes a vast entity in charge of both personalized and economic matters. The power of each community are not determined solely by geography. Brussels, the majority of whose inhabitants are French-speaking, and which has enjoyed increasingly wide independence since 1989, is the subject of the attention of both communities to the east, the German-speaking community, with its own executive, with a close relationship with the Wallon regions. Each Belgium destined to disappear. The question is a genuine one. Nonetheless, it seems certain that the independence of the communities will provide the basis for effective collaboration around values which continue to be held in common. Belgium identity is no abstraction, it is no doubt expressed less within our frontier than by the image which the world has developed on his in-between country. Belgium's identity remains halfway between its history and its art de vivre. A certain savour, no doubt, felt more strongly by foreigners than by Belgium themselves, who are too close to their own roots and past. Belgium is born out of time, but time has largely contributed to untying what has held it together. This federalism development did not happen by chance. This loss of power by the central state has been balanced by increased powers for local authorities, provinces, communes, grouped by communities and regions. This favoring the identification of the population with their own institution. This transformation led to a search for the root and tradition within which each community will find its own reference system. As frontiers become blurred, looking back through the generation of the past enables us to grasp a tradition which guarantees the future. Still the chapter 1. The past as a promise for the future. Until 1830, the history of what has become Belgium appears marked by a series of upheavals which for a long time prevented identification with a state. The people of Belgium never succeeded in uniting into a nation with an image with which it could identify. As far back as the Gallic Wars, 1st century BC, its unity was missing. Caesar describes the small nation between the North Sea and the Meuse as being in constant dispute. Since the Roman domination of the Belgium area appears vowed to division and separation. Indeed, while the southern part was genuinely marked by Latin culture, the northern ruled tribes escaped Romanization more or less entirely. Belgium, with unity already appears as good as impossible, even if the middle of the 5th century sees the whole area under the single law of the Frankish kingdom. Within this dissonant geography, certain cities grew in importance. Tongeren, the ancient capital of Eburon, became a bishopric in around 343. A century later, Clovis established his capital at Tournai. Around these cities, religions began to organize themselves. The development of means of communication rendered them rapidly propitious. From the 8th century, the Rhine-Meuse axis was to play its part in the growth of the valley of the Meuse. From the outset, the Belgium area was defined as a key European crossroads. The regions between the Meuse and the Schelde, an area of dialogue, have also formed a buffer between the major powers which have attempted to organize themselves over the course of history. Each time the empire was divided up, our region became the subject of a strife. From the Treaty of Verdun, 843, to the breakup of the Napoleonic Empire, 1814 to 1850, frontiers inevitably passed through Belgium. Tossed by the hazard of history, the Belgium area would for a short time of dreams of developing into a huge empire of the center, a vain dream for narrow Lotharingia, born the breakup of Charlemagne's empire at Verdun, did not long withstand the appetite for its neighbor. Deprived of Flanders, offered to what would one day be France, it was attached from 925 onward to the German territories of Louis the German. The Scheldt became the dividing line between France and Germany, and the area of what was to become Belgium discovered its vocation as a battlefield. Deprived of a nation or nationalist destiny, our region still aspired to be independent, with which the ephemeral Lotharingia had given it for a moment. Liège, Brabant, and Hainaut conquered an autonomy which, on the other side of the frontiers, Flanders, by then a county, also wrested from its French suzerain. These regions based their independence on their prosperity, taking advantage of their good climate and their location at the crossroads of the largest navigable waterway in Western Europe. They became obvious focal point of development. The land was fertile and its trade route allowed the traders to penetrate deep into the continent. The organization of labour allowed large cities to grow up, equaled only by those of northern Italy. Contact developed with a particular cultural expression. The humanist image of the Italian Renaissance is matched by the Christian intimacy of the Flemish primitives. Van Eyck, Van der Weyden, Memling, and the symbolic quality of prestigious craftsmanship. Brabant altarpiece and the work of Liège goldsmith. This sense of identity was not national, but regional. It was especially strong in Liège, where since 980 prince bishops exercised temporal power over the principality. This awareness was attached not only to the image of a dynasty, but also the symbols of its political and financial institution. People identified themselves with the symbol of their cities, their belfries and parents, preferring the extended power of municipalities and wealthy bourgeoisie of the despotism of monarchs. From the 12th century onwards, the city won their freedom. Bruges developed prodigiously to become one of Europe's leading cities. The ideal of the city herald was of 1789. Cities are ruled by a sense of morality and discipline, of right and duties, as well as an emphasis on protecting the individual, who is required to participate in the life of the state. This region looked onwards to its power being vested in cities and their regions, without giving rise to a centralized and authoritarian state. Even if Belgium did not then exist, a sense of complementarity nonetheless grew up between the cities. Metalworking in the Principality of Liège, textile in Flanders and Brabant, agriculture in Luxembourg. The Belgian area was becoming more interested in trading and in relationship with England than the game being played on the political chessboard. The Hundred-Year War was to ravage the countryside and submit the city to the fury of French and English troops. The Battle of the Golden Spurs 1932, and the pro-English uprising in Kent, led by Jacques van Artevelde, in the midst of the Hundred Year War, left fewer marks on history than on Flemish consciousness, which later saw in them the symbol of a Flemish identity, oppressed by a French-speaking elite. The collective subconscious drew from it the necessary emotional charge to awaken a consciousness of Flemish identity. Economic advance and political power found a unique expression when Philip the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, added Flanders and Artois to his possessions. This marked the beginning of a bitter struggle between France and the Burgundy. The victor of which was to build a great modern stand to the ruin of its enemy. The balance of power in Europe was once again called into question. The Burgundian dream replaced that of the Lotharingia, creating a state between France and Germania at the heart of Europe. The interests of the state found themselves opposed of those of the city. At the same time as its merchants spread Bruges' name and renounced far over the seas, ravaged the countryside, and Liège was exposed repeatedly to the fury of the Burgundians. In French, it's called les Bourgons, les Bourguignons. From these troubled times, the collective memory would later recall the spirit of resistance of the 600 men of Franchimont and the desolation of Liège, devastated in 1868 by Charles the Bold. It would also remind the memory of the freedom of its cities and the prosperity of its regions. The hope of the House of Burgundy were blotted out in 1877 in the snow of Nancy. Charles the Bold disappeared from the scene, offering his daughter Marie and his land to the Habsburg family. Our region, now known as the Netherlands, passed to the Maximilian of Austria, soon to be consecrated emperor. Our unity was born out of absorption, firstly by Austria, then by Spain, with the marriage in 1896 of Philip I to Jeanne, daughter of Reyes Católicos of Spain. This abstract game of inheritance no doubt distanced the population from their suzerain. Popular identity was to be forged by day-to-day life rather than on the parchment of treaties and successions. As the Netherlands passed from Australian to Spanish rules, the city grew and became more powerful through trade and craft, parallel with the gradual constitution of the major modern states of Europe. Our region grew up around the cities. Two antagonistic conceptions of the future began to take shape: raison d'etat and the pragmatism of the free cities. Despite the brilliant memory left by Charles V reign, the constitution of the Circle of Burgundy in 1848, with Brussels and its capital. The leading citizens were soon forced to bow to the order of its successor, Philip II. The Netherlands, integrated into a single powerful unit with an effective administration, reacted to what was perceived as Spanish occupation. The Germanic Holy Roman Empire reigned over undivided Europe, from whose shores it set sail to conquer the world, without realizing that within its border, a sense of identity was growing up opposed to the autocratic rule of Philip II. The grandeur of state is frequently the cause of their decline. The prudent Spaniards organized their empire, placing Margarita of Parma at the head of the Netherlands. The Reformation, distilling virulent criticism of the Church, threatened the equilibrium of the state. Philip II did not hesitate to send north the disturbing figure of the Duke of Alba, backed by the only Inquisition. Our region, with their national tolerance, were to discover the cruelty of a church at the service of a raison d'etat. In 1576, after the Spanish fury had borne down on Antwerp, the frontier was drawn between a northern and a southern Netherlands. At the pacification of Ghent, 1876, the former Netherlands fell apart. To the north, the Protestants put up a ferocious resistance on the Spaniards, creating an independent state based on the Union of Utrecht, 1879. To the south, the Catholics organized themselves, achieving a sort of semi-independence under the tutelage of their governor-general. The image of national unity was possibly born during this feverish period, symbolized by the brilliant reign of Archduke Albert and Isabella, 1898 to 1621. Between the United Province and the Netherlands, a frontier grew up defined less by geography and more by religious confessions. Between 1635 and 1648, the Dutchmen from a united province prosecuted a relentless war against southern Netherlands, wresting from its Flemish Zeeland and northern Brabant. Within this vast hold, the Principality of Liege took advantage of its autonomy to develop and constitute a powerful enclave within the Spanish territories. Spain's grasp weakened, and its northern possession became fragile, just as Louis XIV, Louis XIV, France was searching to find its natural frontiers. The ancient Burgundians' dream became a French reality when Artois, 1659, part of Flanders, 1667 to 68, and 1672 to 78. The Hainaut, 1672 to 1678, passed under the French crown. In 1713, as a result of the Treaty of Utrecht, designed to establish a new European order following the War of the Spanish Succession, the Netherlands returned to Habsburg Austria. Once again, this country passed peaceably throughout the major changes in its history without being able to decide its own destiny. The Flemish parentis came to an end, leaving our city with a number of painful memories and the splendor of a Baroque culture. The Austrian domination was to coincidence with the economic growth of the southern Netherlands. Even if the Austrians at first maintained the autocratic character of the Spanish occupation, our country was one of the most populated of Europe, with a rising prosperity and industrialization which were to mark Wallonia to the core. Mines were opened up, the glass industry flourished, and metalworking grew in importance. The church was influenced by the Enlightenment, which also guided an enlightened sovereigns. A new division was taking place within our area. Wallonia was moving away from the Catholic North allying with the philosophers in its desire for independence. The role of its church was called into question, and education began to be organized. The French Revolution imported into our country the ideal of a modern slave state. The Brabançon Rising of 1789 failed to remove the Austrians, and our territory became a battlefield once again. The coalition against the French Republic has beaten firstly at Jemappes, 1792, and then at Fleurus, 1794. The Republic was now safe to organize its new possession, which included the Netherlands, the Principality of Liège, and the territory abandoned by Holland. In 1795, pre-Reformation Netherlands was reconstituted in the form of 9 departments under the French rule. The bourgeoisie of the cities took advantage of this new power to continue the industrialization of our region. Textiles in Flanders, coal in Wallonia, metalworking in the Liège area become major industrial poles. Our regions, absorbed into what was soon to be the Napoleonic Empire, threw themselves into the epic without flinching from sacrifice. They were to leave them exhaust. A split has developed with the defeat at Waterloo in 1815 was to intensify. The French annexation has favored by the bourgeois ideal nourished by the spirit of the Enlightenment, separating the Flemish people from the French-speaking elite. At Waterloo, the French army included large numbers of Wallon, Dutch, and Flemish troops. Under their flags, for the first time, diverging histories and opinions took the form of organized confrontation. After this slaughter, our regions passed under Dutch rule as part of the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, whilst the Netherlands recovered from their former territorial unity. Mentalities had changed and difference has to be rooted. The heavy-handedness of the House of Orange-Nassau further fueled the rancor. Such speaking Protestants in the north and French-speaking Catholics in the south were no longer able to live within the same boundaries. Evolutionary idea, a permanent feature of the south, were soon to flare up again. Belgium would be born of this divergence and of interest and intentions. Flower carpet with Saint Michael, the patron saint of Brussels. So it's in the main place of Brussels, like in front of the city hall, and there is a lot of flower making a drawing of someone in combat in Spartiate weapons and clothes, and killing something like a wolf or a bear or a what the fuck stuff. So he killing him, and it's a protector and the god of Brussels. Oh, so still not finished. Belgium story and Belgian identity. Our intention has not been simply to retrace the history of this young country in present form, but to attempt to grasp via this past the way in which Belgium understands their country. History bears witness to the slow growth of maturity of a consciousness. It is important to trace the profile of this consciousness. Belgians give, first and foremost, the image of a national consciousness attached to a landscape, the North Sea with its grey and ochres, the dense forest of the Ardennes, and to a certain way of life. Belgium remained unconcerned by the destiny of nation. A Belgian is more attached to the region to the city which give it heartbeat, and to the countryside which give it its colors. When describing this country, the Belgian will define it in negative terms, talking of the country where you never arrive, Pierre Mertens, drawing a picture of what Belgium is not, and in Luc de Hutch, this is not Belgium or boasting, with a disillusioned pride of the grief of the Belgium. Hugo Claus. What is essentially Belgian may well be this ability to affirm oneself by a summation of frustration. In Belgium, tolerance makes this strange form of self-derision. Belgium's history memory closely conditioned is its culture. This mechanism in itself has a symbolic value. It protects Belgium's history destiny onto human beings, a country of irregulars, which find its shape only with the movement of the larger state enclosing it. The Belgium's fate has never been the primary concern. It is settled in the final lines of a treaty, providing the keystone of a continuously changing balance, the final piece of a jigsaw puzzle which imposes on in its perpetual neutrality and its European destiny, a country of memories which has long time dreamed of an empire of the center, a country of tradition, culture and craftsmanship, devoid of nationalist dreams and chauvinism ambitions, a country of the via media, a historic mirage with scarcely formed began to disintegrate, like those sand castles with which Flemish and Wallon children build between the sky and the sea to scan the horizon for a destiny which exchanges the weight of statehood for the adventure of a Europe of the regions. I think it's the end of the chapter. Yes, end of chapter 1, Belgium history and Belgium identity. And next episode is chapter 2, a profile of the people. Thank you for listening to this. I wonder who is here, but whatever. I wish you a good night, a good day, a happy meal, have good dreams. Remember about your dreams and not your dreams. Not because it is important, but because if you have fun to do it, do it. Banane, no. I need random stuff. La dia, les donuts, belle malocus, cette nourriture.